Whether Marvel or DC, Dark Horse, or any other, comic books have generally always operated around the idea of good versus evil. The likes of Captain America, the epitome of all that is good and right, and Superman, the embodiment of hope, perfectly capture this idea of the virtuous at one side of the spectrum against the likes of Red Skull and Lex Luthor at the opposite side. However, not all heroes are that cut and dry. There are many heroes throughout the pages of comics that, although classed as heroes, were never designed to be liked. In some cases, in spite of such characters being created as far from virtuous, fans have ignored such intentions and found a way to love them anyway. I'm Zoe from What Culture, and I return from being frozen in ice for 100 years to bring you 10 comic book heroes you weren't supposed to like. Number 10. Wolverine. Today, Wolverine can class himself among some of the most popular heroes Marvel have to offer. However, he certainly wasn't intended to be beloved when he was introduced in 1974. The character started life as a one-off adversary of the Incredible Hulk, with the mutant brought in to track the Avenger for the Canadian government. At the time, there was no intention of taking Wolverine's story any further, beyond a mysterious superhuman working against the established character of the Hulk. He was almost dropped completely, but was ultimately saved when John Byrne took over the property in the late 1970s. Several years later, thanks to the character's surge in popularity, Wolverine was given his own solo series, and went from strength to strength from there. Number 9. Black Widow. Since her introduction to the world of Marvel Comics all the way back in 1964, it's possible that Natasha Romanoff is one of the most beloved superheroes without powers, only narrowly beat out by the likes of Batman and Iron Man. But then, how likeable can a trained assassin be? She has a very checkered past, and Loki's sentiment from the first Avengers film is as relevant for the comics as it was for the movies. Can you wipe out that much red from your ledger? As it turns out, yeah, you can. Once Natasha solidified her role as an Avenger, surviving short-lived collaborations with Spider-Man, Daredevil, and her own solo series, she began to grow in popularity. After all, wanting to do good is the only thing someone should need in order to become a hero. Well, that and some spandex, maybe. Number 8. The Seven. The boys created something pretty unique. A comic book with very few genuinely likable characters. The protagonists of the story, the titular team, are led by a violent, cruel murderer who is only likable because he is trying to take down a group of even worse people, the superheroes themselves. The likes of Homelander, the Deep, and Jack from Jupiter do just about every awful thing you could think of, and then add some more for spice. The group are the only entry on this list that didn't eventually find popularity with the fans, as while you may love to hate Homelander, that's about as far as it can go, unless he manages a frankly impossible redemption arc in the television show. Number 7. The Winter Soldier. When James Barnes was initially introduced to Marvel Comics way back in 1941, there was nothing not to like about him. Many years later, in 2005, Bucky made a shocking return to the pages of the comic, only this time as the Winter Soldier, a perfect assassin who had been killing people for the Russians over the last several decades. The Winter Soldier was no longer Steve Rogers' friend, but fans simply couldn't separate the two, and fell in love with the assassin, a love that became even more widespread when he turned out to still be a pretty good dude, underneath all that murderous, bloodthirsty assassin brainwashing. Number 6. Lobo. Throughout comic history, there have been many characters that have found themselves fighting the good fight and helping those around them, but simply for their own personal gain or interests. This is exactly the case for Lobo, the last Sazanian. The name Lobo actually translates to he who devours your entrails and thoroughly enjoys it. It wasn't until the 90s that fans fell in love with this particular genocidal maniac, likely for the same reason I did. He's a breath of fresh air compared to usual comics. Well, gross, gory air, but it's still something. Number 5. Loki. In 1949, when the villainous Loki made his comic book debut, there was not a heroic bone in his body. The overshadowed brother of Thor, trickster, and god of mischief was a tyrannical supervillain, terrorizing the people of both Asgard and Earth, among other worlds. Yet somehow, despite there being absolutely no intention for the character to be liked, Loki has become incredibly popular with fans over the years. He's gone from the nemesis of the Avengers to having several solo runs in his name, compelling audiences both on the page and on the big screens. While Tom Hiddleston's captivating performances throughout the Marvel Cinematic Universe may have gone a long way towards this popularity, it isn't the sole reason behind this change. Since his comics debut as a villain, Loki has evolved into a far more complex character than a straightforward villain, with more of a fluid moral compass, passing easily and often between good and bad, and several different versions of the character. Loki is one of the most unique and compelling characters in Marvel's locker. Number 4. Booster Gold. Michael John Carter was a gifted athlete from 25th century Gotham, who was disgraced after purposefully throwing football games so that he and his father could bet against them and win big. He decided to find a way to travel to the 20th century, becoming a superhero in the process. even with something as noble as this, the character found a way to make it selfish. The money, the fame, and the glory was truly why Carter became Booster Gold. Supposedly, no one likes a show-off, but this superhero eventually found his way into the hearts of many fans, despite his less than ideal personality, or perhaps because of how much he's grown since then. Number 3. Damian Wayne. Damian Wayne has a complicated heritage, to say the least, as the test-tube child of Bruce Wayne and Talia al Ghul, and suffered something of a conflicting personality because of it. When he was first introduced as Batman's son, much like Booster Gold, Damian's personality prevented him from being totally likable. While he wanted to help Batman, it was possibly too much of his mother and grandfather in his blood. He was spoiled, arrogant, and violent, and immediately looked to take Tim Drake's place as Robin by his dad's side. He also broke Batman's no-killing rule almost immediately. Despite all this, however, the fifth Robin somehow still managed to eventually carve himself a legacy as one of the most popular characters introduced by DC in recent history. Number 2. Rorschach. Rorschach was intended to be the epitome of a superhero gone wrong, as a violent thug who had no problem killing those he deemed guilty, or just sketchy in any way. The character was intended to highlight the fact that having a superhero in your neighborhood would likely end in catastrophe. However, to most surprise, and slight concern, fans almost entirely missed the point of the character, and he became wildly popular from the very beginning. The issue was that Walter was a sympathetic figure, even if he was one that you instantly recognized doled out his good intentions through terrible methods. Though he was never supposed to be liked, his no-nonsense attitude and complex development resonated with fans in such a way that one never saw coming. Number 1. Deadpool. The comic book industry has always been very incestuous, with many characters being born from inspiration taken from others. Flash and Quicksilver, Aquaman and Namor, Thanos and Darkseid, all incredibly similar characters across both Marvel and DC, and may well have taken inspiration from one another. One such character that was most certainly born out of this kind of inspiration was Deadpool. Created as something of Marvel's version of Deathstroke, Deadpool was never intended to be popular. The mask-wearing mercenary was even named Wade Wilson to mimic DC's Slade Wilson, and was hired to kill Cable and the New Mutants. This was far before Ryan Reynolds' affiliation with the character, and before his lovable, quippy personality shone through in later comics. Wade Wilson was intended to be little more than a rip-off of a successful DC character, as the creators leaned into the initial similarities between the two. Yet the fans couldn't get enough of the hired killer, and before too long, Deadpool had his own solo series, and began to evolve into the wonderful personality we all know and love. After all, there aren't many characters that could kill the entire Marvel universe, twice, and stay this popular.
The Force is with us. What Culture Star Wars is our brand new channel dedicated to all things Star Wars. We'll have all the usual lists, features, and news, plus there'll be ups and downs for all the latest shows and movies, and coverage on Star Wars novels and comics. Subscribe today via whatculture.com/Star Wars or search What Culture Star Wars on YouTube.